So my project was a partnership with the San Francisco Sheriff's Department and We Players Theater Group and National Park Service in Alcatraz. And basically the project was, We Players was doing a performance of Hamlet on Alcatraz, and they were interested in having like a contemporary prison element component to the performance, either in gallery form or somehow involved in the performance, because it's on Alcatraz and it's appropriate that if you're going to do a show of Hamlet on a prison island that you also talk about contemporary prison issues. So I came in to do this work with folks on probation and parole and under court supervision at the San Francisco Sheriff's Department to make giant puppets and banners and other visual elements to be performed with on Alcatraz Island. I'm just laughing because this doesn't trigger me to what I should say now. This is not helping me. But I think I'm going to talk about Alcatraz for a minute. So Alcatraz, just for people to know, it's a prison island in the Bay. Probably everybody knows this already. It was run as a military prison for about 50 years, and then it was a federal prison for another 50 years or so. And then in 1961 it was shut down because it wasn't really an efficient use of federal funds. And then, or 1963 it was closed down, sorry. And then about 6 years after that, a group of indigenous people, a lot of whom were students, occupied the island. And these were folks that would eventually form the American Indian movement, actually. They occupied the island for about 19 months and garnered a lot of public support. President Nixon acknowledged them and made statements about the U.S. government's historical treatment of American Indians. And then the FBI went in after like 19 months and shut down the occupation. But it was a pretty significant event. So this was the context of this island. Was both kind of like this larger-than-life prison that's been made into films, and housed Al Capone, like has this kind of mythology, and then also is this site of resistance. Oh, and there's a picture of. If you haven't been to Alcatraz, this is when you go there. This is the graffiti from when it was occupied. So these images are some pictures from some of the folks that I worked with at the Sheriff's Department. So I went in and I started working with people at the Sheriff's Department, and I worked with two different groups. The first group was all older, they were all adults, and they were all men. And these are pictures from when we took a field trip to Alcatraz. That's why the city's in the back. And they were all on probation or parole or being court monitored. And it was kind of like the first day, I think there was 16 people, and then the second day there was like 2. And then like the next day there was 12. So it was sort of like a real, just people coming in and out kind of thing. But by the end of the 3.5 months or so that I worked with folks there got to be this core group of people who, these are all the core folks in these photos. And then the project started in May, and in July I started working with young people across the hall who were at Five Keys Charter School, which is a charter school that works in juvenile hall. And this is a picture of a couple of them when we took our field trip, hanging out in solitary. And they were a real different group because whereas the older folks were all mandated to be there, the younger ones were, they were all working on their GEDs or their diplomas, so they were just in a different kind of like, they had personal goals. They had a reason to keep coming back and a reason to be there. There's something else I want to say about that, that's okay. So when I first started the project, my struggle, the kind of like questions that I was dealing with was, on the one hand, what is important about Alcatraz for us? For me, as somebody who's never been to prison, and for these folks who, many of whom have been through prison, or all of whom have been through jail. And then number two is like, what the hell does Hamlet have to do with anything? I hadn't even read Hamlet, and I know that most of them hadn't. So like, how do I make this relevant to Alcatraz or to anybody's life? Also, too, I mean, we just really didn't have time to read Hamlet. Like, we just weren't gonna read Hamlet. And I tried to make them watch the movie, and it didn't work. So that was the other thing, was like, you know, how are we gonna address this play and this text when a lot of people just don't have knowledge of it. So what I ended up doing was pulling out 3 themes out of Hamlet, which were redemption, revenge, and isolation, which was similar to the themes that we players was working with. And then we just started talking about those themes: redemption, revenge, and isolation, which everyone can relate to, whether or not you've been to prison. But especially folks who had been to prison could really relate to those. And they ended up actually really like identifying with those themes, the older group, and started coming up with new themes off of them, like riffing off of those. So the redemption one, I'm trying to remember what some of them were. Well, I know the one, the revenge one, they came up with a theme which was family unity is revenge against the system. And so this was like, you know, we started like ripping off some of these themes and making them more personalized. We spent about a month just talking about these themes, talking about how they hit us personally, and then coming up with images off of the conversations we were having. Most folks hadn't really had any art experience, so the beginning process was just starting to think like artists and talk about, you know, how to like think about things visually. Especially because most people who were there were, they like what they were typically doing, where they were mandated to be in like drug addiction counseling or like domestic violence counseling. So it was really a different kind of shift for them to be in this class for 2 hours twice a week. They also, none of them had ever made puppets, so that was, we had to go through that too. And then we started building puppets, and everything that we used was recycled because I was trying to save money. So we used cardboard that I got from the bike shop, and paper bags from the grocery store, and paper mache. This is someone working on one of the crosses. They made a giant cross. And here's this guy painting this bird cage. Alice painting this bird cage. And here's one of the giant heads that they made, and there's a ghost in the background. And it was kind of really awesome how into the puppets they got. Like, this is typical. Also, that ghost in the background, the guy who was really working on that, Ellis, this guy, he would talk to the ghost, and the ghost's name was Boofus. It was really funny and weird. And then I just do also want to say that one of the biggest challenges with working with this particular group of folks was that you know, sometimes people just don't come back. Sometimes people graduate from the program, but sometimes people just don't come back. And that was part of the revolving door situation, was that, like, you know, people would be there for a minute and then they just wouldn't be there anymore. And then eventually in July, I added the second group of younger folks. As I said, they were coming from a different mindset. There's also women in that group. And they were already pretty tight. Like, they had a group that met every day. So I had to kind of work a little bit harder to gain their trust, because they were already sort of like, a lot of them came from the same neighborhood. They'd been knowing each other for a while. So that was a challenge. And I also just didn't have as much time. Like, at this point, it was 2 months out until the show was supposed to go up. So we experimented a lot with what exactly we were going to do. Thank you. And eventually figured out that we wanted to talk about the way that Hamlet has ghosts that haunt him. We also have ghosts that haunt us. And so one of the first exercises we did was this mapping project, where we mapped, everyone in the class mapped every moment of their day. And then we went through, and this was hers was much longer, like this was all just before 7:30 a.m. I think. But then we went through and we looked at what are like the ghosts in our daily lives. What are the places that haunt us, and where are spots that are challenging for us? And from that, we came up with this idea of making shields. Like, what are our shields that protect us through our day to get us through? So here's somebody working on a shield. So we decided to make banners off these shields out of fabric. There's painting them. Here's one of the shields. I really like this one because it's battle gear. So he came up with a sword and crown and stuff that has power and opportunity. This person's shield was that she wants to be a dental assistant. So she made this giant banner. It's like 5 foot by 3 foot. I don't really have time to talk about what happened with the puppets, but they, let's just say they weren't performed with, and it was very unfortunate. But what ended up happening is, because they weren't getting performed with, we had to figure out how are we going to use them and give them their proper place. So with actually Patrick Gillespie, who is a former CCA student, he and I and we players went into an unused space on Alcatraz in the cell house and revamped it to make it into a gallery. And this show just went up last week, so this is like the final closure of this project. But so the puppets went up in the gallery, which is really exciting because they finally got to be seen by the public. And there was a big opening there. I'm forgetting his name. Performed at the opening. He does like cello and interactive video art. And that gallery will be up for 6 months, by the way. So if anybody's going to Alcatraz in the next 6 months, you can go see the work. And I think that's all I have to say. Thank you.